The late afternoon light was coming through the front window of my diner. I was wiping down the counter for the third time. The bell over the door chimed. A man walked in and the whole room went quiet. He was big, dark hair, a scar down the side of his face. I knew who he was right away. Kalen Thorne, the alpha. He moved through the tables like he owned the place. I put my cloth down. My heart gave a sharp thump in my chest. "Can I help you?" I asked. My voice sounded steady. "Good." "I need to speak with the owner," he said. His voice was low. It made the air feel thick. "That's me, Alara Vance." I didn't offer my hand. I kept the counter between us. He looked at me for a second too long. I saw his eyes were a very pale blue. They dropped to the old scar on my left wrist for just a moment. I felt a strange heat there. It infuriated me. I crossed my arms. "State your business, Mr. Thorne." He leaned in. He pressed his palms flat on my clean counter. "There's a dispute about this block," he said. "I'm here to settle it." His fingers were white where he pressed down. I realized he was holding himself very still. That was the only sign anything was wrong. Then my friend Chloe came out from the back with a tub of clean glasses. She stopped short when she saw him. "Alara?" she asked. Her voice was tight with worry. I gave her a small shake of my head. I wanted her to go back. Kalen Thorne's attention snapped to her for a second. When he looked back at me, his jaw was locked. I had to act. I had to get him out. "Let's discuss this outside," I said. I came around the counter. I reached for the door. I brushed my hand against his arm as I passed. The touch was like a spark. A wave of pure warmth washed through me. It wasn't a bad feeling. That was the frightening part. It was a perfect feeling. It said home. I gasped and pulled my hand back like I'd been burned. Kalen Thorne made a low sound in his throat. He caught my wrist. His grip was firm but not painful. The feeling doubled. My vision swam with the scent of pine and cold night air. I couldn't move. I could only stare at our joined hands. His thumb pressed against my racing pulse. His own breathing had gone shallow and rough. The diner door swung open hard. Another man stood there. He was lean with a black tattoo covering his neck. Roderick Slade. He smiled, but it didn't reach his cold gray eyes. He looked from Kalen's hand on my wrist to my face. "Well, well," Slade said. His voice was too smooth. "I came to make an offer on this place, but I see the alpha is already making his own claims." My jaw ached from the rigid clench I'd held since Kalen spoke. I stepped into the crisp alley air, and the cold dampness of the brick wall seeped through my sleeve as I leaned against it. The heavy door swung shut behind me, cutting off the noise. I heard the crunch of gravel under a boot. Kalen Thorne, the alpha, stood a few feet away. His broad shoulders were framed by the dim light of a single bulb over the back door. He was looking at his car, a dark shape in the lot. Then he turned his head toward me. The scar running from his brow to his cheek seemed deeper in the shadow. His eyes weren't cold then. They held a look I didn't expect. It was a tired look, like a man who'd carried something heavy for too long. He moved toward me and my breath caught. I put my hand in my pocket. My fingers curled around my car keys. He stopped an arm's length away. He didn't touch me. "You're leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I had to get to Chloe. I had to make sure she was safe. "Slade's men are watching the roads," he said, his voice low. "You will take my car. It's armored. It has a tracker I can follow." I shook my head. The refusal was automatic. Taking his car felt like accepting a collar. "This isn't a gift, Alara. It is a tactical necessity." Something in his tone shifted. It wasn't a command, but a statement of grim fact. He hadn't chosen me, the bond had. There was a difference. This was about protecting an asset. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a set of keys and held them out. I didn't take them. A flicker of something crossed his face. It wasn't anger. It was frustration, mixed with something else. For a second, his rigid posture softened. He ran a hand through his dark hair, streaked with silver. The gesture was so human, so ordinary, it startled me. The bond between us gave a faint, warm tug in my chest. It was a stupid, dangerous feeling amid all the fear. I pushed it down. I finally took the keys from his open palm. Our fingers brushed. A jolt went through me and I saw his eyes flash. He took a sharp step back as if the contact burned him too. The passenger door of his car suddenly swung open. A man I didn't know unfolded himself from the seat. He was huge, shaved head. Thick arms. He stood by the car door waiting. I froze. Kalen moved instantly. He placed his body between me and the stranger. A low sound came from his throat. It was not human. "Report," Kalen said to the man, his voice like gravel. The man nodded once. "The perimeter is clear for now, Alpha, but Slade's scout just pulled out. He knows she's here." He looked past Kalen at me. His eyes held no malice, only a flat assessment. Then he said the words that turned my blood to ice. He also knows about the human girl, Chloe. They have an address. The low hum of power in my teeth was a stubborn guess that refused to leave. I found myself standing in a sterile, white hallway. The only sound was the faint, persistent buzz of a single fluorescent light. I didn't remember how I got there. My last clear memory was of Kalen putting me in his car. Now my back was pressed against a cool wall. The hallway smelled of bleach and dust. A door stood open at the far end, showing a slice of a plain kitchen. I pushed off the wall, my legs unsteady. The hum in my teeth sharpened into a low ring. I walked toward the kitchen. Each step felt too loud. Kalen was in the kitchen, his broad back to me. He was placing items on a chipped laminate counter, a burner phone, a folded slip of paper. His movements were precise, but his shoulders were set in a tight line. He didn't turn around as I entered. He said, "You should sit down." His voice was flat, a command stripped of all warmth. I stayed where I was, near the doorway. A clock above the stove ticked. Each second was a loud snap in the quiet room. I watched his hands. They were perfectly still for a moment too long on the countertop. Then he picked up the phone again. "Where is Chloe?" My own voice sounded thin. He turned then. His eyes, a stormy gray, scanned my face. There was a faint tension around them, a weariness I hadn't seen before. It wasn't the look of a conqueror. It was the look of a man carrying a weight he didn't want. "She is safe," he said. "Slade's men were watching your diner. They saw us together." He looked away from me, out a small window over the sink. "They saw me holding your hand. To a wolf like Slade, that was a declaration. It made you a target." The meaning crashed into me. My defiance had painted a target on my best friend's back. The helplessness from the diner flooded back, hot and sour in my throat. I must have made a sound because Kalen's head snapped toward me. His expression shifted. Something raw flashed through his eyes before he shut it down. He took a step forward. "I moved her before they could. She's under guard, away from here." He said it like it was a simple fact, but his jaw worked once. A small muscle jumped near his ear. I moved toward the door. My hands had stopped shaking the moment he stepped forward. Real quick, if you're here for the werewolf drama and the slow burn tension, hit subscribe. Because what happened next in that kitchen? It changed everything. The dull ache in my shoulder where Kalen had pinned my arm still pulsed with a deep, stubborn heat. The only sound in the moving car was the rhythmic thump of tires over the uneven seams of an old forest road. I stared out the window at the blur of dark pine trees. My hands were clenched in my lap. I didn't look at him. The silence was a thick thing between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. The air in the car was warm. It smelled of leather and the cold, clean scent that was just him. It made my head feel light. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. After a long while, Kalen spoke. His voice was low and rough. "You think I wanted this?" It wasn't a question. I kept my face turned away. He let out a slow breath. I heard the soft sound of his hands tightening on the steering wheel. Then his grip went slack. For the first time since he forced me into this car, his shoulders dropped. The line of his back lost its rigid control. He just looked tired. He said, "The way you looked at me just then." It wasn't about the threat. I didn't know what to do with that. His next words came out quiet, almost lost under the engine's hum. "This bond," he said, "it's the most terrifying thing I've ever felt." The admission hung in the air. It was an honest answer he hadn't planned to give. The car slowed and pulled onto a gravel drive. He stopped in front of a small, dark cabin. He turned off the engine. The sudden quiet was absolute. He didn't move to get out. He just sat there, looking straight ahead through the windshield. I could feel the warmth of him from across the seat. It was a physical pull, an ache deep in my chest. I didn't move either. I stayed because I had to know why the stranger's eyes had held no malice. I stayed because his fear, just now, had looked too much like my own. My hands still trembled with the ghost of the steering wheel's vibration. I stood just inside the safe house's heavy door. The sterile scent of lemon disinfectant clogged my throat. I tried to push past him, to get back to the car and Chloe and my life. Kalen Thorne, the alpha werewolf, blocked the front door. He spread his arms wide, and the muscles in his forearms stood out like cords. He was bigger than I remembered from the diner. He filled the cramped entryway. "You're not safe out there, Alara. Not from others like me." His voice was grave, insistent. He took a slow step toward me, and his eyes glowed with a faint, unnatural light. The The sight of it made my stomach twist. I backed away until the edge of a cheap laminate table dug into my spine. A cold draft from a vent above whispered across my neck. "Liar, let me go." My voice came out furious and panicked. My hand shot out and shoved a ceramic lamp off the table. It smashed on the floor. White shards scattered across the beige carpet. The noise was loud and final. He moved faster than I could follow. He grabbed my left wrist. Right over the crescent moon scar. A jolt of heat shot up my arm, sharp and startling. I gasped. I tried to pull away, but my body froze. For a single, terrifying second, his touch felt like coming home. That was why my hands had stopped shaking the moment he stepped forward. He didn't let go. His hand was warm and steady. Mine felt like a live wire. "Listen," he said, his voice low and blunt. "You're a Wolfless Omega, a myth." Each word hit like a hammer. "If Slade or anyone else gets you, they won't just kill you. They'll tear our entire world apart fighting over you." He said it with this cold, clinical authority, but I saw the pulse hammering at the base of his throat. He was scared. He laid out rules, strict, non-negotiable rules for my safety. I heard the words, but they sounded like they were coming from another room. This wasn't a revelation. It felt like he was peeling back my own skin without asking, and what he'd muttered under his breath earlier. I'd been wrong to ignore it. His words sat in my stomach like a stone. I stared at the scuffed floor. He hadn't moved from the kitchen counter. The silence was worse than his rules. He let out a slow breath. Then he turned his right hand over, palm up. A thin red line crossed his skin, the cut from the diner's glass. As I watched, the edges of the wound pulled together. The skin smoothed over. It left a faint pink mark that faded to nothing in 10 seconds flat. My mouth went dry. He wasn't human. I had to keep reminding myself. "You have this too," he said. He nodded toward the small window above the sink. The full moon shone through the grimy glass. "It's in your blood. You just don't know how to listen to it yet." I shook my head hard. "No, I'm human." But even as I said it, my skin prickled. A strange warmth spread up my neck under the moon's light. I hugged my arms tight across my chest. Kalen went very still. He looked at me, his head tilted. His eyes, which had been so hard, softened for just a second. He looked lost. "Then why," he whispered, so low I almost didn't hear it, "do you already smell like Pac?" He said it like it was a fact. He said it like it was a miracle. For a moment, I saw his fear plainly. It wasn't fear of me. It was fear for me. It was the same fear that choked me when I thought of Chloe. That's why his fear had looked so much like my own. An hour had passed since the perimeter alarm blared and went dead silent. Kalen stood by the main door, motionless, listening to something I couldn't hear. I saw my chance. A smaller emergency door was set into the opposite wall. I began to shift my weight, moving an inch at a time along the floor. My injured side gave a sharp twinge. I kept my eyes on Kalen's back. When I was halfway to the metal handle, I pushed up and lunged. He moved before my fingers touched the steel. He was just there, blocking my path. He spread his arms wide, his whole body tense. "You're not safe out there, Alara, not from others like me." His voice was low. His eyes held a faint, unnatural light in the dim room. I backed up until a heavy table pressed into my spine. "Liar, let me go." My fury was pure and hot. I grabbed the only thing on the table, a heavy ceramic lamp, and shoved it to the floor. It smashed with a loud, satisfying crash. He closed the distance in one step. His hand shot out and grabbed my forearm just below my elbow. A jolt of heat shot up my arm, so intense it stole my breath. It wasn't pain. It was a deep, shocking warmth that spread through my chest. I gasped and tried to pull away, but my body locked up. For one terrifying second, his touch felt like the only real thing in the world. Then his phone on the table erupted with a harsh, repeating alarm. A glowing blue map projected into the air. 3 red dots moved fast through a grid of trees, heading right for our blinking green dot. Kalen's face went hard. He shoved me back from the door with a force that sent me stumbling. He snarled, "It's too late for running. They're here. Now you help me barricade this place or we both die." But why my body locked up when he touched me? I still had no answer for that. The metallic taste of adrenaline was still sour on my tongue. I stared at the ragged barricade of furniture we'd piled up, my back pressed against the cold door. A single lamp cast long, jumping shadows. Kalen stood by the boarded-up window, listening. His shoulders were rigid. He hadn't looked at me since the attackers pulled back. Chloe came in from the kitchen. She carried a small black phone. Her face was pale. "She left this," she said, holding it out to Kalen. "It was on the step. It's from one of your pack members." Kalen took the phone. His thumb brushed the cracked screen. The movement was slow, almost careful. For a second, he looked tired. Then his expression closed off again. He played a voice recording. The voice was distorted, but I knew it was Slade. "Tell the key her scent is a song only I can hear. Come to me, Alara. Your wolfless heart holds the door." The words just sat there in the quiet room. I felt cold. He hadn't chosen me. Something else had put us here. There was a difference. Chloe shifted her feet on the creaky floor. She looked from me to Kaylin, waiting. The silence after Chloe spoke was thick enough to choke on. She looked from me to Kaylin, waiting. Then she added, "That's not all." She was worried. "Your pack council called the burner phone. They know she's here. They know what she is. They order you to return to the capital now. Alone. To answer for harboring an anomaly." Kaylin's hand tightened on the phone. I saw a muscle jump in his jaw. He was cornered, and I finally understood it. The bond between us gave a single, sharp ache in my chest. It was fear, but it was his fear too. "A key," I said. My voice sounded dead. "He called me a key." Kaylin finally looked at me. His eyes were dark in the low light. "Your scent," he said. He spoke to me, not to Chloe. "It's always smelled like pack. Like mine. I thought it was the bond. It was." He walked to the table. He picked up a small, polished piece of metal, his alpha insignia. He held it out toward me. The metal didn't glow. It didn't shine, but the shadows around it, they pulled back. They bent away from its edges like water avoiding a stone. The room held its breath. I just stared. The hidden power wasn't in me. It was in the space around me. It was in the quiet. Chloe cleared her throat. I'll go check the back door again." She slipped out, and it was just the two of us. The echo of Slade's voice was still vibrating in my throat like a swallowed scream. I walked into the kitchen. The gray dawn light was coming through the window. I traced the cold, gritty rim of the empty sink with one finger. The burner phone sat on the table between us. Chloe's warning about the pack council was a fresh cut. I watched Kaylin from across the room. He stood very still by the window, looking out at the pines. The dawn light showed the lines at the corners of his eyes. He looked older than he should. "What happens now?" I asked. My own voice sounded flat in the quiet room. He didn't turn. "I take you to a more secure location. Then I go to the capital." To answer for me, it wasn't a question. My chest felt tight. I hated that his trouble was because of me. "Yes." That single word was heavy. He finally turned from the window. His eyes met mine, and for a second I felt a warm pull deep in my stomach. It was gone just as fast, replaced by cold fear. He walked toward the table but stopped a few feet away. His hand rested on the back of a wooden chair. His fingers pressed into the grain so hard I thought I heard the wood creak. He was scared too. I didn't know what to say, so I said the wrong thing. "You could leave me here. Tell them you lost me." His head snapped up. "No." The word was a low growl. He took a sharp breath, and his hand went still on the chair. He looked down at his own hand as if it belonged to someone else. He paused for a long moment before he spoke again, his voice much lower. "I can't." The admission hung there. I knew he was bound by more than just rules. It was the bond. It was the same thing that made my body lock up when he touched me. It wasn't magic. It was a command written in my blood, a command to be still for him, to yield. The realization made my face go hot with shame. I turned back to the sink. I pressed my palm flat against the stainless steel. I focused on the chill seeping into my skin. A soft click made me turn. Kaylin had picked up his alpha insignia from the table. He was looking at it, not at me. "Get your coat," he said. His voice was rough. "We leave in 5 minutes." I didn't move. "And then you go to face your pack alone." "I do my duty." He slipped the insignia into his pocket. As his hand came out, his fingers brushed against the old laminated surface of the table. Where his fingertips passed, the yellowed laminate peeled back in 3 perfect, curling strips. It looked like it had been waiting years to do that. He stared at it. I stared at it. He made a fist and pulled his hand away. I put it away and got on with things, but the image of that laminate peeling up, it refused to stay put in my mind. The cold from the kitchen tiles had seeped into my bones, a deep and stubborn chill my coat couldn't touch. I found myself standing in the archives a few minutes later, my nostrils already stinging from the dry, paper dust air. I didn't know why I'd come in here. The room was small and lined with metal shelves stacked with old ledgers. I heard Kaylin's heavy footsteps stop in the doorway behind me. He didn't speak. I could feel the heat of him from across the room, a steady pull against my spine. I kept my back to him and ran a finger along a dusty shelf. The silence stretched until it felt solid. I turned around then. Kalen stood framed by the door. He was just looking at the floor between us. His hands were loose at his sides, but I saw the way his fingers kept curling and then relaxing. It was a small, restless motion I had never seen from him before. He always moved with purpose, with control. This was different. This looked like a man who didn't know what to do with his own hands. It made my throat feel tight. "You asked why you smelled like pack to me," he said. His voice was low and rough. He didn't look up. "It's because you do. You always have. It's not the bond, it's you." He said it like a simple truth, like stating the weather. Then he shook his head once, a sharp jerk. He hadn't meant to say that. I could tell by the way he pressed his lips together right after. He was giving away pieces he wanted to keep. He walked into the room then. He stopped an arm's length away from me. The space between us felt charged with a quiet hum. I could see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes. I could smell the pine and cold air that clung to his clothes. My heart was beating hard against my ribs. He lifted his hand, just a little, like he might reach out. I held my breath, but his hand dropped back to his side. He just stood there, so close I could feel the warmth coming off him. He was letting me decide what happened next. The way he looked at me just then, it wasn't the bond. I didn't know what to do with that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cheap-looking phone and a folded slip of paper. He placed them on the shelf beside me with a final sort of sound. "The car keys are in it," he said. His voice was gravel. "The address on that paper is a safe place. For Omegas. No one will look for you there." He turned his back to me then, facing the door. He put his whole body between me and the only exit, but he was giving me a way out. He stood perfectly still, waiting for me to choose. Everything else I could deal with. Why his hand had dropped before he could reach for me was different. My eyes fell from his rigid back to the paper on the table. The burner phone sat next to it, black and cheap. Kalen Thorne stood with his hands braced on the kitchen counter. He did not turn around. The choice was mine. The silence was a wall between us. I was ashamed of how much I wanted to look at him. I did not reach for the paper. Instead, I placed my palm flat on the laminate tabletop. The surface was cool and slightly sticky. I thought about the rules. I thought about being a key. I thought about Chloe, safe in her apartment downtown. My breath came out in a slow stream. Then I pushed. Not with my body, but with the strange, empty space inside my chest. The air in the room thickened for a second. The laminate under my palm peeled back with a soft, crackling sound. It curled away from the particle board beneath just like it had for him, but it did not stop where my fingers ended. The peeling spread outward in a perfect circle, a foot wide. I snatched my hand back. The curl of plastic settled, a frozen wave on the table. Kalen turned his head. He looked at the table, then at my face. His eyes were wide. "You see?" I said. My voice was too loud. "It is not you, it is me." I was scared. My throat felt tight. Things fall apart when I get upset. They just come undone. He turned fully then. He took 2 steps toward the table. He looked at the ruined laminate, then at my hands which I had clenched at my sides. For a single heartbeat, a warm thread pulled tight behind my ribs, connecting me to him. Then it was gone. He reached out, not for me, but to trace the edge of the peeled plastic with one finger. "Ilara," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of all its command. He did not finish the thought. He just kept looking at that circle on the table, his shoulders dropping an inch. I saw the understanding change his face. It was not a bond he forced on the world. The world bent because I was in it. I picked up the slip of paper with the address. I held it up between us. "I am not going to this sanctuary," I said. I tore the paper in half. The sound was very sharp. I let the pieces fall onto the peeled table. "You are not going north alone as bait." I picked up the burner phone. I felt its light weight in my hand. "We are calling Chloe. Then we are going to find Slade first." Why I'd felt that warm thread behind my ribs, I wasn't going to like the answer. I looked at his broad back, at the tense line of his neck. My heart beat a heavy rhythm against my ribs. I was scared. My mouth felt dry. I did not reach for the phone. I took a step forward on the creaking wooden floor. The sound made him flinch. A tiny movement. He still did not turn. "What happens if I choose you?" I asked. My voice sounded strange in the quiet room. He went completely still for 3 long seconds. Then he turned to face me. His eyes, that dark green, were not guarded now. They were wide open and raw. "Then we fight for each other," he said. His voice was low and rough. It was not a grand promise. It was a simple, terrifying fact. A flicker of warmth cut through my fear, brief but undeniable. The words were out before I could stop them. "Slade called me a key. Your pack fears what I am." I took another step toward him. What door does a Wolfless Omega open? Kalen looked down at his own hands. He rubbed his thumb over the pad of his index finger, back and forth. His earlier question in the car echoed in my head. He had asked why I flinched from his touch. He had dropped his hand before he could reach for me. Now I understood. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid for me. He was afraid of what his touch might pull into the world. He finally looked up at me, and his expression was full of a grim kind of respect. My heart hammered against my ribs. "I don't know what door you open," Kalen said. The words just hung there in the dusty room. "But I know whose hand is on the other side, trying to turn the key." He moved then. 2 strides closed the space between us. He didn't touch me. He stopped just short, his body a wall between me and whatever was waiting. "If you stay, you're choosing that war. You're choosing to stand beside me while they try to break it down." I felt that truth sink right into me. This was it. Run to some unknown safety or stand and face the thing that scared even him. The coin in my pocket felt stupid all of a sudden. My power wasn't something to spend. It was a door, and it was already open. I pushed the thought aside. Who was on the other side? I'd have to deal with that later. The heat from his vow still prickled on my skin. My boots sank into the damp moss of the clearing, slick and silver under the moon. Kalen stood a few feet away, his head tilted back. The silver streaks in his hair seemed to glow. Then the moonlight hit his bare arms. The skin there rippled. A series of loud cracks split the quiet. His back arched, sharp and wrong. The sound he made wasn't a scream. It was a deep, grinding groan, like something breaking apart. I watched from the edge of the trees. My legs wouldn't move. My hands flew up to cover my mouth. The smell of wet earth and crushed pine filled my nose. This wasn't a shift, it was a rupture. Dark, coarse fur tore through the skin on his shoulders. His whole shape jerked and twisted in these painful, snapping motions. Kalen Thorne, the alpha, fell to his knees in the moss. His human fingers dug deep grooves into the dirt. A choked, half-formed howl ripped out of his throat. Pure agony. I saw the exact moment his ice-blue eyes vanished, swallowed up by this molten gold. His face stretched into a muzzle full of sharp, white teeth. It felt like it lasted forever. Finally, a massive black wolf stood where the man had been, twice the size of any natural animal. Its sides heaved with ragged breaths. Those gold eyes found me in the shadows. The wolf took one stumbling step toward me, then its front legs gave out. The whole beast collapsed onto its side with a heavy thud. Its breath came in rough, wet pants. I forgot my fear then. I forgot all the rules. I just moved. My feet carried me across the clearing. I dropped to my knees in the cold moss beside him. I put my hands flat against his heaving flank. The fur was warm and thick under my palms. He didn't flinch. A low whine vibrated through him, and I felt that warm thread behind my ribs pull tight. A simple, physical truth. My fear was gone, replaced by this terrible need to shield him. This was the hidden thing. It wasn't in his strength. It was in this broken trust between us. Everything else I could handle. Why my fear vanished the second I touched him? That was different. The phantom weight of his fur still pressed against my shaking hands. Back in the safe house, lamplight pooled on the old floorboards like liquid amber. I found him in the corner behind the wood stove, human again, wrapped in a thin, dusty blanket. He sat on the floor with his knees pulled up, shivering so hard I could see it from across the room. I grabbed a thicker blanket from the couch and walked over. I didn't ask. I just knelt and draped it over his bare shoulders. The skin along his spine was marked with fresh, red scratches. He flinched when my fingers brushed him. I started to pull my hand back. Then he leaned into the touch, just a little. He kept his face turned to the dark wall. The muscle in his cheek jumped. His breathing was too fast, too shallow. I stayed kneeling beside him. "I'm scared of what I might do," he said. His voice was a raw scrape. He finally looked at me. Those ice-blue eyes weren't fierce. They were wide, full of a fear I'd never seen in him. "The bond isn't a chain for me. It's a fuse. To protect you, I would burn down the world. I would become something even I wouldn't recognize." He looked down at his own hands like they belonged to a stranger. We were only inches apart in that dark corner. I saw his breath catch. He pulled the blanket tighter and looked at the floor. My hand stayed there in the air between us. The bond was a low ache in my chest, pulling me toward him. His world had rules I didn't get, rules I couldn't survive. Yet here I was. I didn't move away. I reached for the first aid kit I'd brought over. I took out a clean cloth, dipped it in a bowl of warm water, and started to gently clean the dirt from the scratches on his back. He went very, very still. He didn't speak. The only sounds were the soft crackle of the stove and our quiet breathing. Why he'd gone so still when I touched him? I'd been wrong to ignore it. The ache from cleaning his wounds still pulsed in my palms. Now I stood in the wreckage of my diner. My boot crunched on a shattered plate from my own blue and white china set. Chloe had texted me one word: proof. She was here alone. I saw the black SUV parked across the street first. A dark, silent shape that hadn't moved for hours. I ducked behind the dumpster in the alley, my phone cold in my hand. The diner's back door was propped open with a brick. A thin yellow line of light cut across the wet asphalt. I crept forward. Every step made my stomach tight. I slipped inside the ruined kitchen. Broken glass and spilled sugar crunched under my shoes. I could hear Chloe moving in the front of the diner. She was muttering to herself, low and frantic. Then the noise just stopped. A floorboard creaked behind me. A weight that wasn't mine. A hand clamped over my mouth from behind, and the smell of cheap cologne and old sweat filled my nose. "Looking for something?" a rough voice said in my ear. I dropped my phone in pure shock. It skittered across the tile. The man holding me was one of Slade's enforcers, bulky with a shaved head. I stomped hard on his instep with my boot heel. He grunted, and his grip loosened for a second. I broke free and ran through the kitchen door into the dark dining room. I crashed into a table, sending a chair clattering over. Chloe was by the old cash register. Her face was white in the gloom. She pointed a trembling finger at the floor near the counter. My dropped phone was there, screen cracked but still lit. Next to it, placed neatly on the formica, was Slade's personal cell phone. Its screen glowed with a pre-typed message, just for me. The lead enforcer stepped from the shadows then, blocking our path to the front door. He smiled. It didn't reach his cold eyes. But Slade's phone said, that would come back, and here's where it gets crazy. Because the cold dread from his message settled into a permanent ache behind my ribs, and now I was in the safe house's main room. The sharp scent of spilled gun oil cut through the stale morning air. Kalen stood over a paper map spread across a heavy wooden table. His beta, a man named Jax, pointed to a spot. Two other warriors I didn't know watched me from the corners. Their looks were not friendly. Kalen ignored them. He traced a route with his finger. His movements were too quick. They lacked their usual precision. He wasn't human. I had to keep reminding myself of that. "Why can't we flank them here?" Jax asked. He tapped a wooded area on the map. "Because Slade will expect that," Kalen said. His voice was flat. "He knows these tactics. We go straight through the main gate. We hit them with everything we have left, before the deadline." "That's a suicide run," one of the other warriors said. He was young, with nervous eyes. "It's the only run we have time for," Kalen snapped back. He finally looked at me. A single drop of sweat traced a path from his temple down the line of his jaw. It was the only sign of the strain he was under. The bond between us gave a faint pull, like a thread tied around my sternum. I pushed the feeling down. I watched his hand on the map. His knuckles were white. This was the reckless fury he feared, the monster he thought the bond would create. He was ready to burn his own people down to save one. I understood why he'd gone so still when I touched his back in the woods. My touch wasn't a comfort. It was the spark that could light that fuse. He was terrified my simple contact would trigger this blind, tactical rage. He was doing it now, without any touch at all. "I have a different idea," I said. My voice sounded too loud in the tense room. Kalen's head snapped up. But before I could say another word, the phone on the counter chimed. It was Slade's phone. A live video feed opened. Chloe was on the screen. Her lip was split. One eye was swollen, but she stared straight into the camera. A digital timer above her head counted down from 2 hours. Then the screen went black. The front door of the safe house swung open before any of us could move. An older man with silver-streaked hair stepped inside. His face was grim. This was Roderick, the pack elder. Why was the safe house door unlocked for an elder to just walk right in? That question sat there, unfinished. My throat still ached from the force of my own defiance, raw and tight. I found myself in an alcove off the main room, dusty sunlight coming through a small window. I had walked away from the argument. I needed a moment to think without Kalen's alpha intensity filling all the space. Old maps were pinned to the walls, faded and useless now. My fingers brushed a leather-bound book on the highest shelf. A sharp edge of parchment stuck out from its pages. I pulled it free. It wasn't a map. It was a hand-drawn diagram. The lines showed interlocking circles and strange symbols. In the center was a crude drawing of a door. Words were scrawled in the margin in tight, angry script. They described a ritual. To unlock the gate using a song of silence. My breath caught in my chest. This was the door Slade meant. His message on the phone glowed in my memory. He said my scent was a song only he could hear. He said my wolfless heart held the door. The diagram showed how. I understood it in a cold flash. The power was not in being a wolf. It was in the absence of one. A floorboard creaked behind me. Kalen stood at the alcove entrance. The pack elder Roderick had left. Kalen's broad shoulders filled the doorway. A fresh cut on his cheekbone stood out against his pale skin. He looked at the paper in my hand. His eyes went from tired to alert. He didn't move to take it from me. He just waited. I saw the question in the set of his mouth. I also saw the restraint. He was giving me the choice to speak first. I held the diagram out to him. My hand was perfectly steady. That scared me more than shaking would have. "This is what he wants," I said. My voice was flat. "He doesn't want to claim me. He wants to use me as a tool, a key for this." Kalen took the paper. He studied it for a long moment. His silence was worse than any outburst. When he looked up, his eyes held a new kind of fear. It wasn't fear of me. It was fear for what this meant. The warmth of the bond flickered in my chest. It felt like a small, doomed candle in a vast dark. The confirmation was a physical blow. I felt sick. Kalen stared at the paper. His breath left him in a short, sharp puff. He didn't look at me. "I've always felt like an imposter," I said. The words just fell into the quiet. Like I was manufactured, like my own skin was a lie. Whatever came next, why his breath left him when he saw my birth date. That was the part I hadn't figured out. A cold, metallic taste stayed in my mouth, stubborn as a bad memory. I found myself standing on the safe house porch later, the air damp with coming rain. I looked at my own hands. They were just hands. They didn't look like a key or a weapon or a lab experiment. I felt hollowed out. My stomach was a tight knot of shame. Kalen stepped out behind me. He didn't fill the space like he usually did. He just leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. The late light caught the tired lines around his eyes. We stood there, quiet. The only sound was the wind in the pines. "You're thinking in circles," he said finally. His voice was low, stripped of all its usual command. "I'm thinking I'm not real," I said. The words were flat and true. My throat felt tight. "Everything I am, every choice, every feeling. Is it just a program running? Is this pull toward you even mine?" I gestured between us, a sharp, helpless motion. The air between us felt warm. Heavy, a constant, silent pull. He pushed off the doorframe. He came to stand beside me at the rail, close enough that I could feel the heat from his arm. He didn't touch me. "When I first saw the diagram," he said, looking out at the trees, "the one you handed to me in the diner, I saw the bond lines. They weren't just connections, they were conduits." He turned his head toward me. His expression was open, almost weary. I saw how a single point of influence could redirect everything. "That's what scared me, not what you are, what you could do." His honesty was a small shock. It was a vulnerability, a crack in the alpha stone. I thought his fear was disgust. I was wrong. The realization made my breath catch. He moved then. He turned to face me fully and cupped my face in his hands. His palms were rough and warm. He forced my eyes to meet his. "I don't care what made you," he said. Each word was deliberate. "I know who you are. You are the woman who stood between me and a bullet. Who chose to stay when it was sane to run. Your worth isn't in your creation. It's in your courage." He released me and took half a step back. The space between us vibrated with everything he'd just said and everything he hadn't. He asked, his voice low and earnest, "So, tell me, what's your plan?" I didn't answer right then. The ghost of his fingers on my jaw was a brand I could still feel hours later, against the cold night air. I pressed my back against the rough, corrugated metal of Slade's main gate. The edge bit into my shoulder, blade through my jacket. The assault began with a roar that shook the ground under my feet. Kalen's loyalists, a blur of fur and fury, slammed into the outer fence line from the woods. Automatic gunfire cracked the air. Short, disciplined bursts from Slade's guards on the wall. I heard Kalen's voice over the comms unit in my ear. He didn't shout. He gave low, clear orders to take the left flank. His tone was flat and cold. A sharp knife in the middle of all that chaos. Then a high-pitched whine sliced through the noise. It made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I saw two wolves stumble and fall, paws over their ears. The sonic emitters, they were working. And then I saw Kalen move. He wasn't in wolf form. He was just a man, sprinting through the gunfire toward the main gate controls. His left arm hung at a bad angle, the shoulder clearly injured. But his right hand held the taser he'd taken from this place. He did not look like a king then. He looked like a man who would tear the world apart with his bare hands. The bond between us gave a single, sharp ache in my chest. I had to look away. He hadn't chosen me. Something else had put us here, and there was a difference. I focused on the small service hatch beside me. My hands were steady as I punched in the access code from memory. The metal door hissed open into a dark tunnel. I slipped inside, just as a new sound erupted outside. A raw, brutal crunch of metal and concrete. Kalen had breached the gate. Over the comms, his breathing was ragged. He said, "All units, press hard, draw them all to the front." Then quieter, directly to me, he said, "I hear you breathing. That's my signal." He was listening for the faint sound of my breaths over the channel. And that's when it clicked. That's why his breath had stopped when he saw my birth date on that report. He wasn't disgusted. He was afraid of the bond's precision, afraid of how perfectly it tuned him to me, a weapon he never asked for. I moved down the dark corridor. My own breathing was the only sound. Then a guard rounded the corner ahead. I froze. Before he could raise his weapon, a shadow detached from the ceiling. It was Roderick Slade's lead enforcer, a bulky man with a shaved head. He dropped down and snapped the guard's neck with one clean motion. Then he looked right at me. He didn't attack. He just placed Slade's personal cell phone on a pipe ledge, and then he melted back into the shadows. The screen glowed. It showed a live feed of Chloe in a cell. A timer above her head counted down from 10 minutes. This wasn't part of the plan. Slade was waiting for me, and he knew I was coming alone. Why his enforcer hadn't killed me when he saw me? That question wasn't going away. The lab was dead silent. My boots made no sound on the polished floor, but the hum of the machines vibrated deep in my teeth. The air smelled like ozone and old paper. The room was a cold museum of my life. Glass cylinders lined one wall. Each one held a small, withered object. I saw a child's sneaker, a lock of hair tied with a blue ribbon, a set of baby teeth. My stomach turned over. A monitor displayed a rotating DNA helix, next to a file labeled V17. My face, from a school photo, was clipped to the corner. Roderick Slade stood before a large terminal. His blonde hair was damp with sweat. He didn't turn around. "I wondered if you'd find the gallery," he said. His voice was calm, like a teacher. "Every milestone documented, every growth spurt measured. Your human family never knew we were watching." He finally looked at me. His cold gray eyes held no triumph, only a flat curiosity. "Do you feel owned yet?" I forced my hands to stay at my sides. My fingers wanted to curl into fists. "Where is Chloe?" "She's alive, for now." He gestured to the screen. A live feed showed Chloe in a bare cell, sitting on a cot. Her head was in her hands. Slade tapped a key. The image changed. It showed a schematic of a complex machine. A person-shaped chamber was at its center. "This is what you were made for," he said. "The bond resonance amplifier. Your unique physiology can forge a link between any alpha and any omega. I could build an army bound to my will alone." I took a step forward. "You want to force a mate bond?" "I want to correct a flaw in our world," he said. He turned fully toward me. The black tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse in the low light. "Kalen Thorne rules by ancient, crumbling tradition. I will build something new. You will be its cornerstone." He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, carved stone. It was the Alpha insignia. He placed it on the console between us. "Or Chloe dies in the next 5 minutes. Choose." I looked from the insignia to the feet of Chloe. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought of Kalen. I remembered the way his shoulders had slumped for just a second, after he confessed his fear. That small crack in his armor was more real than anything in this room. I did not reach for the stone. Instead, I placed my palm flat on the cold console. "I am not a key," I said. The hum in the room shifted. It climbed to a higher pitch. The lights in the containment units flickered, then brightened. A sharp, clean scent cut through the ozone, like a forest after lightning. Slade's eyes widened. He took a step back, but what had happened when my hand touched the console? I still had no answer for that. A massive explosion shook the ceiling. Dust rained down, the gate assault. Slade glanced up, distracted for 1 second. That was all I needed. The numbness shattered into a clear, sharp rage. I didn't think. My hand went to the taser on my belt. I lunged and pressed it against his side. His body went rigid. He collapsed. I didn't wait. I tore the straps from Chloe's wrists and ankles. Her one good eye focused on me. "Ilara." "We're leaving," I said. I pulled her up. We ran for the door I'd entered. As we crossed the threshold, a heavy clang echoed behind us. The blast door I'd crawled past now slid shut, sealing the room. A red light began to spin above it. We were trapped in the narrow maintenance corridor. Slade was locked in with us, and here's where it gets crazy. Why he'd looked up at the explosion instead of flinching didn't add up. It was like he was waiting for it. My knuckles ached from how hard I was gripping the stun weapon. The air was thick with the smell of burnt wires. Slade was slumped against the main console. Chloe stood beside me rubbing her wrists. Then the console screen flashed a red warning. A new program started with a low hum from the vents. Slade pushed himself up with a pained laugh. His left arm hung wrong. He looked at the screen with this wild triumph. "You think the lockdown was the plan?" he asked. His voice was rough but loud. "That was just the cage. Now comes the madness." He explained it fast. The program would flood the compound with artificial pheromones. It would force every werewolf inside into a permanent frenzy. They'd attack anything that moved until nothing was left. My stomach tightened into a cold knot. This was worse than death. It was a slaughterhouse. Chloe stared at the screen. Her face went white. Slade's good hand moved toward a large green button on the console. It said Final Dispersion. He was going to kill his own men. He was going to kill Kalen's pack. He was going to kill us. I did not think. I just moved. I shoved Chloe toward the side of the console. I lunged at Slade with the taser raised again, and that's when the door exploded. A deafening crash shook the room. The sealed door blew inward in a cloud of dust. Kalen stood in the wreckage. His clothes were torn. His face was smeared with dirt. His eyes found mine across the room. Then his head snapped toward the vent above him. A fine, glittering mist was already spraying into the air. He inhaled sharply. His eyes changed. The clear green I knew clouded over with a flat, predatory yellow. His focus shifted from me to Slade. A low growl started deep in his chest. He took a step toward our struggle. Then he stopped. His whole body shook. He was fighting the chemical pull with everything he had. But why Kalen's focus shifted from me to Slade? I wasn't going to like the answer. My knuckles ached from the force of slamming into Slade's jaw. The cold air of the ritual chamber stung my eyes. Slade wiped blood from his mouth and gave a sharp nod to his enforcers. They dragged Chloe away from me toward a reinforced wall locker. The sound of the heavy door locking shut over her protests hit me like a punch. I lunged toward it, but Slade caught my arm. His grip was like a steel cuff. The central dais held a machine of gleaming metal and coiled wires. It hummed with a low frequency I felt in my teeth. "Let her go," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. "She's insurance," Slade said. He pushed me toward the machine. "Your cooperation for her safe exit. Simple." I fought him then, for real. I kicked and twisted and used the moves Kalen had drilled into me. I landed a solid hit to his ribs. He grunted but didn't let go. He was stronger, fueled by a frantic energy. The distant sound of fighting echoed through the walls. Kalen's pack was still trying to reach us. Slade's look kept flicking to the sealed main door. He was running out of time. He finally wrestled me onto the cold dais. Restraints snapped shut over my wrists and ankles. The metal was slick and unforgiving. A clear panel lowered over my chest, pinning me down. The way he'd looked at me just then wasn't about the threat. I didn't know what to do with that. He paused, his hand hovering over a control panel. His breath hitched just once. It wasn't triumph. It looked like dread. "You think this is about power," he said. His voice was low, meant only for me. "It's about correction." He tapped a screen. A file appeared. The header read V17, VANCE. Below it was a list of names under compatible alpha pairings. His name was at the top. Kalen Thorne S. was not listed at all. "You were designed," he said. "You were meant to be bound to a controllable alpha. To me, Thorne's bond with you is a mistake, a flaw in their old-world magic." The machine's hum climbed to a whine. A needle-point emitter descended toward my temple. "This won't awaken your wolf, Alara. It will cut his thread and tie you to the right anchor, me." The realization was a cold flood in my veins. This was never about claiming an omega. It was about erasing a bond he could never form. It was personal. He didn't just want Kalen's title. He wanted to steal the very pull I fought against. The bond I felt gave a single, sharp ache beneath the terror. A warning. On the other side of the sealed door, a tremendous impact shook the wall. Dust rained from the ceiling. Slade didn't flinch. He looked up toward the sound, and his mouth tightened into a grim line. He had expected that. He had planned for Kalen to be right there to hear everything. The machine powered up with a piercing whir. Lights traced a path along the coils, leading straight to the needle at my head. One thing kept pulling at me, the needle at my temple and the impact on the door. And here, where it gets crazy. Because that memory, the cold metal and the whine of that machine, it was still there. But now I was standing in a dark, dusty war room. The air smelled like damp wool. Kalen was across from me, leaning on the big table. He was favoring his right leg. Chloe sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket. I looked down at my hands on the scarred wood. That list of alphas, I said. My voice sounded dead in the quiet. It was just a piece of paper. It doesn't change anything. I was trying to convince myself. It changes everything, Kalen said. His voice was rough. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at a satellite picture of Slade's compound. He wanted you to believe your choice was never real, that I was never meant for you. He finally looked up. A muscle in his cheek jumped. That's why he stopped trying to kill me and started trying to take you. He doesn't want a throne. He wants the key to every throne. Chloe shifted in her chair. The blanket slipped, and I saw the fresh bandage on her arm. So he built a better trap, she said. One you'd walk right into if you believed his story. I don't believe it, I said, but a cold stone of doubt settled in my stomach. I turned to Kalen. You were afraid of the bond, you called it a fuse. Was that because you knew? I needed to hear him say it. He pushed away from the table and walked to the room's one high window. Pale light cut across the scar on his cheek. I was afraid of it because I felt it the second I caught your scent, he said. His back was to me. It was a perfect note. Too perfect. It bypassed every instinct I had to test you, to challenge you. It just was. He turned around then. His eyes weren't predatory. They were just tired. That terrified me more than any rival. A thing designed in a lab to fit me. The silence that followed was absolute. I felt the truth of it sink in. My independence, my resistance, even my fear of him, were those mine? Or were they part of the design too? The real power wasn't in a machine. It was in that question. It unmade every choice I'd ever made. My ribs ached with a dull throb. Morning light cut sharp lines across the dusty floorboards of the safe house. I stood by the window, watching Kalen's car pull away. He'd left to face the council. Chloe sat at the kitchen table behind me, tracing the edge of a data drive. The silence was thick. I knew I should feel something more than this hollow numbness. The front door slammed open so hard the walls shook. Kalen stood in the doorway, his shoulders filling the frame. He did not look like a man coming back from a negotiation. A deep, fresh scratch ran from his temple down to his jaw. It was still bleeding. He walked past me without a word, his movement stiff. He went straight to the small console where the Alpha insignia always sat. The polished metal disc was gone. I understood what that meant before he even spoke. They refused, Kalen said. His voice was low and rough. He kept his back to me, his hands braced on the empty console. They cited the law. They said you were a human liability, not worth a war. I saw the tension in his back, the way his shirt stretched tight. He was holding himself together by force. I felt a sudden, stupid urge to put my hand on that strained fabric. Whatever I felt, it might just be the bond talking. Chloe stood up. She moved carefully, favoring her bruised side. Then they need to hear this, she said. Her voice was stronger than I expected. She plugged the data drive into a speaker. Slade's voice, smug and clear, filled the room. He laid out his whole plan, to use my engineered nature not just to claim me, but to shatter and rewrite pack bonds everywhere. It was a declaration of war against every wolf. When the recording ended, the silence came back. It was colder now. Kalen turned around. His eyes found mine. For a second, I saw past the alpha, past the anger. I saw just a man who had lost everything. He reached up and unclasped the thin chain he always wore. A simple, worn ring dangled from it. He pressed it into my hand. His fingers were warm. My father, he said. Then he walked to the door. I am not going as your alpha, he told the empty room, and me. I am going as your mate. Chloe has the coordinates. The cold weight of Kalen's abandoned insignia pressed against my ribs, tucked inside my jacket. I leaned against a pine tree at the edge of a clearing, tasting the damp scent of coming dawn. Kalen stood a few feet away. He stopped walking a minute ago. He was just staring at the dark line of trees where we needed to go. The silence between us was heavy, complete. He rubbed a hand over his face. It was a slow, tired motion. He let his hand drop, and I saw his fingers were not quite steady. That small tremor was a crack in everything I knew about him. The alpha who faced down his entire council without flinching now stood in a dark forest with unsteady hands. I did not know what to say. I kept my own hands still at my sides. I keep calculating the time, he said. His voice was low and rough. He wasn't looking at me. The drive, the approach on foot, every possible delay. I've run the numbers 10 times. He went quiet again. Then he said, "I'm not afraid of dying tonight." I waited. The bond was a cold ache in my chest, a thread pulled too tight. "I'm afraid of seeing her eyes," he said. The words sounded ripped from him. If I get there and I see in her eyes that she believed I would come, and that I was too late, that she faced him alone because I failed. He finally turned his head toward me. His face was pale in the gloom, his eyes dark hollows. That was the truth he hadn't meant to say. I took a step closer. The space between us was just a few feet of moss and damp earth. I could see the rapid pulse in the side of his neck. He didn't move away. He didn't move toward me either. We stood in that charged stillness. I could have reached out. He could have closed the distance. We did neither. We just stood there, caught in the gravity of his fear and my silent witness. That question, why my hand hadn't moved to close that last foot of moss, sat there like something unfinished. The ache behind my sternum sharpened into a single, guiding point of white-hot pain. I followed that pain through the chamber's arched entrance. The scent of damp stone and ozone coated the back of my throat. Slade stood over the dais where I was bound. His ceremonial robe was stained with dirt and his own blood. He grabbed my hands and forced them open. His claws were sharp and cold. He slashed them across my palms in one quick, deep cut. I bit down on a cry as my blood dripped onto the carved stone below. He chanted words that hurt my ears. A pressure built in the room, thick and heavy. My body went rigid against the metal restraints. A strange, silver light filled the edges of my vision. It felt like something was tearing open inside my chest. Then the pain changed. It wasn't just in my hands anymore. It was in my bones, in my teeth. A high, piercing sound started in the center of my skull. I couldn't hold it in. I screamed. The sound didn't just come from me. It came from everywhere. The heavy ritual candles around the dais exploded into dust. A wave of force blasted out from my body. It threw Slade across the room. He hit the far wall with a sickening crunch of stone and bone. The machinery around us sparked and died. Cracks raced up the ancient walls like black lightning. I stood there, held up only by the straps. Energy swirled around me in silent, violent currents. Slade pushed himself up from the rubble. One of his shoulders sat at a wrong angle. He stared at me, and his expression wasn't triumphant anymore. It was pure shock. He scrambled to his feet, raising his uninjured arm like he could ward me off. Then the energy left me all at once. I collapsed back onto the cold dais, empty and shaking. Slade wiped blood from his mouth. He looked from the shattered machinery to me, and his shock hardened into something worse. He shrugged out of his torn robe. He walked toward me, each step deliberate. "A wild key is useless," he snarled. His fingers, stained with my blood, went to his own belt. He unbuckled it, pulling the thick leather strap free with a sharp sound. "So I'll break you and forge you into a proper tool." My skin still hummed. The cold floor of the security corridor felt shockingly cold against my bare legs as I stumbled forward. I was guided only by the sterile blue glow of the emergency lights. I couldn't stop the tremor in my hands. The power that had broken out of me still echoed in my bones. It was a raw, jagged thing I didn't understand. Ahead, the heavy door to the ritual chamber was warped and smoking in its frame. And then it kicked open. Kaelin Thorne and my friend Chloe stood on the other side. 3 of Slade's guards turned toward them, their teeth bared. Kaelin shifted his arms into dark, curved claws. He stepped in front of Chloe, putting his body between her and the threat. His ice-blue eyes scanned the room and found me. For a single second, his expression wasn't one of battle focus. It was pure, unguarded horror. Then the floor beneath us shuddered violently. Dust and chunks of ceiling tile rained down. One guard stumbled, confused by the tremor. Kaelin used that moment to tackle him, driving him into the cracked wall. Chloe ducked a wild swing from another guard. She jammed her taser into his side. The man convulsed and fell. A support beam above us groaned and cracked. Kaelin looked past the fight again, toward the central dais where I stood. I saw his focus break. A third guard raked claws across Kaelin's shoulder. He snarled in pain, but the sound was more frustration than agony. Kaelin roared. It wasn't just a sound, it was a force. His alpha command blasted through the room. Enough. The guards froze, their bodies locked up under the weight of his will. His eyes were fixed on me and on Slade, who was rising up behind me. Could he reach us before the whole place fell down? He shoved the dazed guard aside and ran. It wasn't a clean, fast sprint. It was a desperate, limping charge. Chloe shouted a warning I couldn't hear. Then a second pulse erupted from the central console. It blasted the warped door right off its hinges. Smoke and debris filled the space between us. Through the haze, I saw Kalen skid to a halt. Slade stood over me, looking cruel and in control, but Kalen didn't charge. Chloe grabbed his arm. She pointed back toward the security office. On a secondary monitor, live data was scrolling fast. Kalen looked from the screen to Slade and then to me. The gash on his shoulder was bleeding freely down his arm. We collapsed against a stone wall in a side tunnel. The air was thick and dry. It smelled like old potatoes rotting in a cellar. Kalen pressed a hand hard to his shoulder. The silver light that had come from me was gone. My whole body shook from the emptiness it left behind. I hugged my arms tight and stared at my hands. They looked like tools meant for breaking things. "It's still in me," I whispered. My voice was thin. "It feels like a storm waiting to start again." A tiny, sharp spark jumped from my finger to the damp wall. It left a black pinprick mark on the stone. I flinched back. Chloe dug a bandage from her pack. She watched me with careful, wide eyes. She didn't come closer. Kalen reached for me with his clean hand. "Elura, look at me." His voice was rough, like gravel. I made myself meet his eyes. They weren't full of disgust. They were full of a pain that had nothing to do with his shoulder. Tears cut clean tracks through the dirt on my cheeks. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there right away," he said. He cupped the side of my face. His thumb wiped one of the tears away. His fingers were cold. I leaned into his touch. The storm inside me quieted to a low hum, but his shoulder was still bleeding. His shirt was soaked dark red. I placed my trembling hand gently over the wound. A faint silver light pulsed under my skin. I didn't know what I was doing. I only knew I had to try. The light grew a little warmer. It didn't burn him. The bleeding slowed to a seep. He let out a slow breath. His shoulders relaxed just a fraction. He looked at our joined hands for a long moment. He didn't speak. "I felt it," I whispered. When the power woke up, it was like a star going supernova inside my chest. It wanted to burn everything it touched. "Even you, I am so terrified of what I am now." Kalen didn't command me to stop. He didn't dismiss my fear. He pulled me into his arms instead. His body was battered and solid against mine. He spoke against my hair. "That power is not you. It is a weapon someone gave you. Your choice to wield it or not is what defines you. I have seen you choose courage and mercy every single time." He went quiet again, his hand on my back stilled. "I had to choose to stop the protocol. It meant leaving you with him seconds longer. That choice will haunt me forever." Above us, through the floorboards, we heard Slade's enraged shout echo down the hall. My eyes went hard. I placed my hand over Kalen's heart. I felt the bond between us, a warmth and an ache. "Then we use it," I said. "We use me. Tell me how we turn this liability into our escape." I wasn't going to like the answer. The ghost of his arms was a pressure I still felt against my ribs. We came out of the servants' passage into the central hall. The sharp smell of polished stone hit me like a slap. The vast space was silent, then I saw them. Slade's enforcers held silver blades against the throats of 5 kneeling wolves. I recognized 2 faces from Kalen's pack. My stomach dropped. Slade stood before them. He had a fresh cut across his forehead. He smiled when he saw us. "The key and the fallen king," he said. He gestured to his captives. "A simple trade, your surrender and Elura's willing hand in mine, their lives for your freedom." Kalen went rigid beside me. I felt the storm inside me twist. It wanted to lash out and burn. I was scared. My breath stuck in my throat. I looked at Kalen. His face was pale beneath the dirt and blood. His eyes moved over his people. One, a young woman, met his look. Her chin trembled. Kalen's shoulders slumped. He took a slow step forward. He began to lower himself to one knee on the hard floor. The surrender was happening. I couldn't move, but his knee never touched the ground. He stopped. He straightened up again. He turned his back completely on Slade and his offered deal. He looked only at me. His voice was clear and carried across the hall. "The choice is yours," he said. "How we fight or if we run, you command, I follow." The storm inside me went perfectly still and quiet. Slade's smile vanished. Every eye turned to me. One thing kept pulling at me. What Kalen had said under his breath when he thought I wasn't listening. My heart hammered against my ribs. Kalen stood in front of me in that cramped storage alcove, not moving. The choice was mine, and I was terrified. I forced myself to look past him. The alcove was just dusty metal shelves and old electrical parts. The air smelled like stale oil. My own power was still buzzing under my skin, a wrong note in a silent room. All I could feel was the bond. It was a warm, steady pull toward him. An anchor in the storm. That scared me too. You can't just give me command, I said. My voice sounded thin. You're the alpha. Not here, Kalen said. He didn't move. Not for this. I saw his hands then. They were hanging loose at his sides, palms open. It was a posture of offering. The way he looked at me just then, I didn't know what to do with that. I turned and ran my hand along a shelf. My fingers brushed a plastic crate. It felt gritty. I needed to do something. My hand closed on a small, forgotten object at the back. I pulled it out. It was a broken circuit board, all green plastic and burnt copper. I held it in my palm. The buzzing under my skin focused. A tiny spark, silver blue and silent, jumped from my fingertip to a shattered capacitor. The dead component glowed for a second, then it went dark forever. I stared at my hand. I understood. I looked at Kalen. I showed him my empty palm. It's not a key, I said. The truth was quiet and solid inside me. A key opens a lock. It's a tool for someone else. I closed my hand into a fist. The warmth in my chest was my own. I think I'm a fuse, Kalen, just like you said yours was, but I get to choose what blows. The cold sweat on my back was freezing. I followed Kalen into the vault's deeper chamber. The only sound was the faint, frantic hum of dormant machinery. The air tasted like copper and dust. I leaned against a cold metal console, my legs weak. Kalen stood a few feet away. He ran a hand through his dark hair. He watched the sealed door, his body a rigid line. If I use this, I said, my voice too loud in the quiet, I become what he made me. A key. A tool. You were never a tool, Kalen finally turned. The harsh light carved shadows under his eyes. You've been fighting your design since the moment I met you. My hand sparked in the corridor. Yours didn't. I held my hand up between us. It only reacts for me. It's part of the design. Kalen was quiet for a long moment. He looked down at his own hands. Your first surge, in the ritual chamber, it didn't hurt me. It cut through the chemical frenzy Slade forced on me. It calmed the storm in my head. I stopped breathing. I'd been so focused on the destruction I'd missed.